keynotes, Craig Jenkins from University of British Columbia and Alan Millar from Stirling. At this point in our program, we'll invite Alan to give us a talk on epistemology and the contested character experience. So Alan will go, and then we'll have about half an hour Q&A after. Right?
Thank you. Let me say first, I think it's a great idea to have conferences of this general shape, and I trust you're all enjoying yourselves. I hope you will still enjoy yourselves after the next hour and a half. I'd like to thank the people who organized the conference for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to talk about two conceptions of sensory experience, and I'm going to outline epistemologies, theories of perceptual knowledge and justification that have been associated with each of these two conceptions of sensory experience. So much of what I'm going to be doing is characterizing positions, neither of which I hold, fully myself. And then towards the end, I'm going to point to a direction of inquiry which I take myself, although I won't have time to go into a great deal of detail for that. A basic tenet of empiricism is that by perceiving things in our surroundings, we can acquire knowledge concerning those things. That this tenet is true is hardly a matter of serious dispute, but there are significant complications relating to the nature of perception and the character of the experiences that are implicated in perception. These issues, in turn, have an impact on how we should think of perceptual knowledge and of how perception yields justification for beliefs. This talk is framed by two assumptions that I shall take to be agreed on all sides. The first is that there is such a thing as sensory perception, conceived as perception via the modalities of sight, touch, hearing, taste, and smell, and consisting in episodes of awareness of mind-independent things. It might be scenes, objects, events, or features of these. When I speak of perception without qualification, I'll be speaking of perception in that sense. The second assumption that I'll take to be agreed on all sides is that perception, at least normally, implicates sensory experiences. For instance, it belongs to normal visual perception that it implicates experiences that have a qualitatively visual character. So if you see a robin in your garden, you have an experience that contributes to enabling you visually to recall seeing the robin. That is, recall in a manner that involves visualizing how it looked. Having such an experience might also contribute to enabling you visually to imagine a robin in some setting. The complications of interest arise when we delve more deeply into how sensory experiences are to be conceived. To address these complications, we need a distinction between experiences that are sensory and experiences that are, in a narrower sense, and a narrower range of experiences that are perceptual. Perceptual experiences are experiences implicated by perceptions of mind-independent things. Sensory experiences include perceptual experiences and any experiences like them, whether they are perceptual or not. An experience can be, for instance, qualitatively oral, thus sensory, even if not implicated in an episode of perception. Just to give you, you hardly need examples, but I think this one is quite vivid. It's certainly been an impact on me. Once, in the hazy state between sleeping and being awake, I was convinced that there was a bee buzzing between the window of the bedroom and the curtain that covered the window. I'd heard that kind of thing before. It was just as if there was a bee buzzing there. I was convinced that there was. I got up. I looked behind the curtain to see, I wanted to let the bee out so that it would be released. No bee there. And there was nothing else in the surroundings that could explain the experience. It became evident that what I was experiencing was, I think for the first time, a mild case of tinnitus. The sound was, as it were, in me. To me, it was just as if I was hearing something buzzing in the environment, but I wasn't. I had an experience that was just like that, but I didn't actually hear any such thing, a noise in the surroundings. Now, that experience is going to be counted as a sensory experience in the terminology I'm adopting, but it's not going to count as a perceptual experience because it wasn't a case of perceptual consciousness of something in one's surroundings. Now, these are merely terminological matters. The substantive issues concern how we should think of sensory experiences in general and about those sensory experiences that are perceptual, being implicated in perception of mind-independent objects. So now we come to the first conception that I want to outline, and I'll call it the relationalist conception. Relationalists think that perceptual experiences are essentially relational, for they hold that any such experience is an episode of awareness of, acquaintance with, mind-independent things. They may, and I think should hold, that there can be sensory experiences that are not perceptual in order to accommodate the kind of example I just gave about seeming to hear a buzzing bee, but they're committed to the view that such experiences would differ in a fundamental way from any perceptual experiences that are implicated, any experiences that are implicated in perception, and on account simply of not being episodes of awareness of mind-independent things. For non-relationalists, by contrast, perceptual experiences do not differ fundamentally from sensory experiences that are not perceptual. The kind of sensory experiences such as might occur in a perfect hallucination or a partial hallucination. They are ingredients of episodes of perception, but they're never in themselves episodes of perceptual awareness of mind-independent things. The non-relationalist view forms part of standard causal theories of perception. According to such theories, perceptual experiences are not of their very nature perceptual, they count as perceptual only because they are contingently related to mind-independent things, in virtue of being caused by the impact of the presence of such things on our senses. It's important to bear in mind that in all of this, no one is disputing that perception is a relational episode. When you perceive your surroundings, then obviously you are related to those things in your surroundings. Perception is essentially relational. What's in dispute is whether the experiences that are implicated in episodes of perception are themselves essentially relational. Relationalists say they are, non-relationalists say they're not. Relationalists and non-relationalists may, and I think should agree, that it's possible to give characterizations of sensory experiences that are non-committal with respect to whether they are perceptual. For instance, they may agree that if you see a spider, then you have a visual experience such that it is as if you're looking at a spider, and further, that it does not follow just from the fact that you have an experience that satisfies that description that you're looking at a spider. One could have such an experience while hallucinating a spider. Consider the following three episodes, imaginary episodes. The first is a straightforward visual perception. You're looking at a spider on a wall and have an experience such that it's just as if you're looking at a spider on a wall. That's the first episode. The second episode is a perfectly hallucinatory counterpart of that first episode. That is, you have a perfect hallucination consisting in an experience such that in every respect it is just as if you're looking at the scene that you would have been looking at in the first episode. The third episode is a partially hallucinatory counterpart of the first episode. It's an episode in which you see the wall but merely hallucinate a spider on it. No spider is there. There will be something in common to the experiences implicated in each of the episodes described. Each would be such that it is just as if you're looking at a spider on a wall. Commonality in that respect need not be challenged by relationalists. Central to the relationalist view is the idea that the experience implicated in each of our 3 episodes would differ fundamentally, notwithstanding the commonality I've just described. As they view the matter, the first episode, that of seeing the spider on the wall, does not break down into an inner experience plus the satisfaction of further conditions. On the standard causal theory, the further conditions would be that the object in question, the spider, is there on the wall, and there's a suitable causal relation between your having that experience and the presence of the spider on the wall. They think it doesn't break down in that way. Rather, the implicated visual experience is itself essentially relational, in that it consists in an episode of visual awareness of a spider on the wall. That is what makes the relationist view a view about perceptual experience. And it's important not to conflate that view with the truism, which, as I said, is agreed on all sides, that seeing the spider on the wall is an essentially relational episode. The second episode is the perfectly hallucinatory one. Given that it is the perfectly hallucinatory counterpart of the first episode, the implicated experience does not differ from the first with respect to what it is as if you are looking at. Nonetheless, on the relationist view, it differs fundamentally from that implicated in the first episode, since it's not the case that in virtue of having it, you're visually aware of anything that is in your surroundings. The third episode is a partially hallucinatory counterpart of the first episode. With respect to what it is as if you're looking at, it need not differ from the experiences implicated in either of the first 2 episodes. But for the relationship, even if it does not differ in this respect from the other experiences, it's still an experience of a different sort from each of these. It would, on this view, clearly differ from the experience implicated in the second episode, if only because it's constitutive of your having it that you're visually aware of a wall. This is the third episode that we're talking about. Okay, so you're visually aware of the wall, but you're not visually aware of a spider because no spider's there. Now, implicit in the preceding remarks, in the view I've characterized, is a disjunctive conception of sensory experience. Or more precisely, a disjunctive conception of what it takes for a sensory experience to be such that it is as if you're looking at a spider on a wall. On this conception, or at least one version of it, any such experience is either an episode of visual awareness of a spider on a wall, or an experience that is not such an episode. In the latter case, it could be implicated in either a perfectly hallucinatory episode or a partially hallucinatory episode. This disjunctive conception is simply a way of reconciling what relationalists take to be the fundamental difference between the various experiences I described and what they have in common. It's a way of reconciling the claims about fundamental differences with the commonality that I characterized previously. What they have in common is that they all fall under the concept of being such that it is as if one is looking at a spider on a wall. And they may fall under a whole load of other concepts as well. But all of these concepts are to be disjunctively explicated according to the relationalists. Now, for non-relationalists who adopt some form of causal theory of perception, the experiences implicated by perceptions are only contingently related to the things perceived. For them, experience differ only if they differ qualitatively, and there would be no qualitative difference between the experiences implicated by the first and second episodes, because that in the second episode is a hallucinatory counterpart of that in the first. Additionally, on this view, there need be no qualitative difference between the experience in the third episode and either of the other 2. Now, some relationalists hold that in the visual case, that's the case where you're involving qualitatively visual experiences, they hold that in the visual case, the qualitative character of an experience implicated by perception is given by the qualitative character of the things perceived from the subject's point of view. This is it's a rather odd view. I find it a very puzzling view myself. But they think that the qualitative character of the experience is given by the actual objects that you perceive and the point of view from which you're perceiving. You'll find this in John Campbell's work, including the chapters that he has in the recent book that he has produced with Qasim Qassam. That, I suppose, is a standard view among relationalists. If relationalists reject it, they would be committed to holding that experiences can differ fundamentally, even if they don't differ qualitatively. Okay, so that's the two. So far, we've been talking about the metaphysics of sensory experience and perceptual experience. So far, nothing explicitly about epistemology. What I want to do now is characterize a position that's standardly associated with the non-relationalist view, and I'll deal with that first. And then I'll deal with a position that has been associated with a relationalist view, specifically the views of John McDowell. So first then, a type of epistemology that I think most non-relationalists like. There are all sorts of differences, but I'll be presenting from differences. I'm talking about a general type of theory of perceptual knowledge and justification. When perceptual knowledge is addressed in any detail within mainstream epistemology, the view of sensory experience that is standardly endorsed is the non-relationalist one. The dominant background view is that knowledge must be explicated in terms of justified belief, and justified belief in turn explicated independently of knowledge. The focus is on how perception yields justification for beliefs. Given that focus, it can easily seem to be an entirely uncontroversial move to suppose that some beliefs derive their justification from experiences conceived in the non-relationalist way. There are two lines of thought that contribute to the motivation of this general approach to justification from perception. The first line of thought is foundationalist in spirit. Here's a passage from a 2008 paper by Connie and Feldman. I quote, "We hold that experiences can be evidence and beliefs are only derivatively evidence. Experience is our point of interaction with the world. Conscious awareness is how we gain whatever evidence we have. Furthermore, all ultimate evidence is experiential. Believing a proposition all by itself is not evidence of its truth. Something at the interface of your mind and the world, your experiences, serves to justify belief in a proposition, if anything does. What we are calling your ultimate evidence does this without needing any justification in order to provide it." It's the second part of that that brings out the foundationalist spirit. Much could be said about this passage, but for present purposes, the salient idea is that experiences constitute our ultimate evidence for what we believe about the world. The idea is that while in practice we often justify what we think in terms of other things that we think, assumptions that we hold, at some point justification must come not from further assumptions, but beyond those from sensory experiences. The idea is not inextricably tied to the assumption. The general idea is not inextricably tied to the assumption that experiences constitute evidence. Even if that is wrong, it could still be that experiences must confer justification on some beliefs, since one might think justification must ultimately derive from something outside our system of beliefs. Okay, so that's part of the foundationalist motivation for talking about experiences as justifiers of beliefs. To introduce the other motivation, we need to have in mind a good case, bad case pair. Take the good case to be one in which you see a spider and believe it to be a spider. You also believe that there is a spider before you. In the bad case, there is no spider before you, and you undergo a perfect hallucination that is the counterpart of the experience you have in the good case. In this case, you believe that there's a spider before you, but of course you do not believe of any spider that it is before you. After all, none is. It's commonly assumed that cases so related just like our good case and our bad case. It's commonly assumed that cases so related can be on a par with respect to the justification of the belief that there's a spider before you. Call this the parity thesis. Many are attracted by the thought that there simply could not be any difference between the cases with respect to the justification of the belief that a spider is before you, provided that the experiences have the same qualitative character, and that in neither cases you have any reason to doubt what your experience leads you to think. In what follows, when I talk about the good case, bad case, I'll assume that whatever other requirements there are beyond the qualitative sameness of the experiences are met. So we're dealing with a good case, bad case pair that defenders of the parity thesis will take to be actually on a par with respect to justification. Okay? So bear that in mind as we proceed. So we've got the two motivations for the type of non-relationalist epistemology that I want to consider. One is the foundationalist one. The other one is based on what's thought to be the intuitive plausibility of the parity thesis. These lines of thought can easily seem compelling, but and I must say, I was once compelled by them because I defended the kind of epistemology that I'm talking about now. This was a topic of my first book, Reasons and Experience. I don't hold to that view now, and I want to just draw attention to a couple of things that are problematic about it. There are many things problematic, but I'll mention just two. I suppose the problem is this. When people talk of experiences as justifiers of beliefs, we want to have a clear idea of how they can be justifiers of beliefs. It seems to me that we do have a fairly clear idea of how something that we know, right, something that we know to be so, can justify our thinking that something else is so. For something that we know can settle it that something else is so, or make it likely that something else is so. Now, of course, you might think, look, even if you agree with that, you might think it's not essential to having justification on the basis of an assumption that you know those assumptions to be true. Lots of people think otherwise. I think it's almost obvious that you've got to know the things, but I'm not going to plug that at the moment. Lots of people will say, look, your belief that P can be justified on the basis of the belief that Q and the belief that R, though you don't know both that Q and that R. But even on that view, we have some idea of why it might be thought that the assumptions that Q and R could provide justification for thinking that P, for they could entail, or if true, provide evidential support for the proposition that P. And of course, you might have some reason to think them true, even if you don't know them. It seems to me far from clear, though, how experiences are supposed to stand to the beliefs that they induce to confer justification on those beliefs. I think quite a lot of the time people just think, look, isn't it just intuitively obvious that if you had an experience, suppose you were in the perfectly hallucinatory case of the three that I mentioned earlier, you're having a visual experience such as just as if you're looking at a spider on a wall. And they think it's perfectly obvious that if you're in that state and you've no reason to not to take your experience at face value, then it's simply plain and obvious that you're justified in believing there's a spider on a wall. But that in itself, I mean, of course, it could be that in an episode like that, there's some sort of status that you have. It's certainly understandable that you should believe as you do believe, right? And you may, in a sense, be, you could be a reasonable person. You're not, as it were, flouting any, you're not being careless in any way. So you might even say, it wasn't unreasonable of you to think as you did. However, it seems to me a case can be made. I'm not going to make the case here, but a case can be made for saying, look, there's a problem here. There's still an issue as to actually filling out how an experience that you have must relate to a belief you have in order for that experience to confer at least the feasible justification on that belief. Now, it's sometimes thought that all you need for this purpose is the idea that the experience, suppose the belief is the belief that P, all you need is that the experience should represent that P. But it's not downhill all the way for such an account. First, even if it's granted that experiences can represent that P, it's not obvious how an experience that merely represents that P should be thought to confer justification on the belief that P. Go back to the case of where you're believing something on the basis of prior assumptions. Even if you can be justified in believing that P on the basis of assumptions, some of which are false, it seems to be a crucial part of the justificatory story that you take those assumptions to be true and would count them as giving you justification only so long as you did so. But merely having experience that represents that P incurs no commitment whatsoever to thinking that P, and does not account for how the proposition that P becomes available to you as something to be believed. As a matter of psychology, it would be very natural for you to believe that P, but we're not just talking about the causal order here. We're talking about justification. Okay, that's one issue with this representationalist view. But of course, the second issue is to whether experience should be regarded as having representational content articulable in propositional form. I don't myself believe that epistemologists need to avail themselves of that assumption. But whatever you think of that, it's certainly an eminently disputable assumption. I want now to section 3. If you're using the handout, it's section 3 we're on. I want now to talk about a type of epistemology that is associated with a relationist conception of experience. I deliberately use the word association because I want to actually prize apart some of the assumptions about metaphysics from the associated assumptions about epistemology. That's part of the direction that I'm going in. Okay, so we're dealing now with a type of relationalist epistemology, and I'm going to focus on the thinking of John McDowell. It's central to McDowell's thinking that the parity thesis is false. Let's return to our good case, bad case pair. I'll take it to be agreed on all sides that in both cases you have an experience such that it is as if you're looking at a spider. According to McDowell, it's a fundamental mistake to suppose that justification has its source in what is common to the two cases. In McDowell's terms, in the good case, the fact that a spider is before you is made manifest to you by means of your experience. Part of the story of how it is made manifest is a relationalist account of experience. In seeing the spider, you have an experience that consists in visual awareness of this very spider. On McDowell's picture, that visual awareness and your conceptual capacities account for how it can be that the fact that this spider is before you is made manifest to you. The upshot is that what you gain through your experience in this good case could be voiced by a demonstrative statement. This is a spider. How are we to make sense of this? This takes us to, I've just been talking about the sort of negative phase of McDowell's thinking. This is what he rejects. He rejects the parity thesis. We come now to the positive stage, how we're supposed to make sense of this rejection. Note first that the epistemology I sketched in the previous section on that epistemology, the justificatory status of the beliefs in the good and bad cases is the same. Accordingly, whether you perceive the spider is irrelevant to that status. Whether you actually perceive this particular spider, that in the good case you're looking at, is irrelevant to the justificatory status of your belief. That's just a consequence of the parity thesis. On this view, perception, of course, can furnish us with justified belief, but only in the sense that it supplies us with the experience that is the real source of the justification. An experience with the same qualitative character, but not implicated in an episode of perception, could have had the same justificatory role as the experience in the good case. Advocates of this sort of epistemology, the non-relationalist epistemology, can acknowledge that whether you perceive a spider bears on whether you know that a spider is before you. But for them, reason's work is done and justification secured so long as your belief is based on the right-handed kind of experience, however caused, and you lack any reason to suppose that you don't see what it is as if you see. For McDowell, by contrast, the justificatory standing of what you believe in the good case depends crucially on your actually being visually aware of a spider. In the background here is a conception of how reason, rational thought, is responsive to, reaches out to facts. And this is a prominent thing in McDowell's book, Mind and World. I want to highlight 4 elements in McDowell's thinking at this point. The first is the direct realist assumption that perceptual consciousness is direct awareness of mind-independent things. He holds more than that, but he holds at least that. And that's an assumption that I think we should share. It's direct in that it's not mediated by awareness of anything else, right? So our perceptual consciousness of the world on this view is direct realist because you're directly aware of what in your surroundings. What does that mean? It's not that you're aware of them perceptually by being perceptually aware of something else. Of course, you can have indirect perception. You know, if you're suppose you're on a boat and you're in visual contact with electronic contact with a submersible machine, then this can be exploring the seabed, and you can see the seabed indirectly because you're looking at a monitor that is transmitting pictures taken by the submersible machine. That's indirect perception, and there's nothing problematic about the idea that there is such perception, at least for present purposes, that's so. What we're dealing with, though, we're thinking of cases of direct perception, and direct realists hold that our perception of what is in our surroundings is routinely direct, although it can be indirect. Okay, that's the first element I want to highlight. The second, and we're talking about McDowell's epistemology here. The second is that we can tell things about what we see from what we see. That's to say, we can come to know things in this way. The third is that we come to know things in this way through the exercise of recognitional abilities. So, when I look at the bird in my garden, I see the bird, and because I'm suitably responsive to the way the bird looks, I recognize it from the way it looks to be, say, a robin or a magpie or whatever it is. So I exercise an ability to recognize robins as robins or magpies as magpies from the way they look. The fourth assumption is that in coming to know things in this way, we have a warrant or justification for believing something about what we see. The justification is provided by a fact as to what we see to be so. So I look at the robin, I recognize it as a robin. On McDowell's view, same time, very same time, indeed, by way of exercising the very capacity by which you recognize it as a robin, there is available to you the fact that you see that it's a robin. Now, all of these elements that I've just listed, the 4 elements that I've listed, are explicit in a passage. I'm afraid it's not on the handout, but it's from the article that McDowell contributes to the Haddock and McPherson volume on disjunctivism. Here's the passage, quoting McDowell now. I can tell a zebra when I see one. If what I believe to be a zebra is actually a cunningly painted mule, then of course I do not recognize it as a zebra, as I suppose. And I do not have the warrant I think I have for believing it is a zebra, namely, that I see it to be a zebra. My ability to recognize zebras is fallible. It does not follow, this is a crucial point, that I cannot ever have the warrant for believing that an animal in front of me is a zebra, constituted by seeing that it is a zebra. If the animal in front of me is a zebra, and conditions are suitable for exercising my ability to recognize zebras when I see them, then that ability, fallible though it is, enables me to see that it is a zebra and know that I do. Now, that's the end of the quotation from McDowell. Imagine yourself as a subject in the scenario that McDowell describes. Crucial part of the story is that you visually recognize a zebra as a zebra. That is to say, you tell, so come to know of something you see that it is a zebra, right? And indeed, you tell this from what you see. As I would put it, you tell from the way the thing looks. The implicated belief is not just an existential generalization to the fact that there is a zebra before you. It's a demonstrative belief concerning this visually picked out zebra, and is to the effect that it is a zebra. The upshot is both knowledge concerning the thing seen to the effect that it's a zebra, and a justified belief with that content. The justification being supplied by a reason constituted by the fact that you see this object to be a zebra. On McDowell's picture, the explanation of the acquisition of both the knowledge and the justification for the implicated belief lies in the exercise of the relevant recognitional ability or capacity. This is explicit in the following passage from a more recent essay by McDowell. This is from his Aquinas lecture that's been published as a little book with the title, with the title Perception as a Capacity for Knowledge. Here's the passage. We need to emphasize the connection between reason and self-consciousness. A rational perceptual capacity is a capacity not only to know certain kinds of thing about the environment, but on an occasion on which one knows something of the relevant kind, through the exercise of the capacity in question, to know that that is how one knows it. The capacity, of course fallible, to know on certain occasions that one's experience is revealing to one that things are a certain way, which is a bit of self-knowledge. It's just an aspect of the capacity, of course fallible, to know through the experience on those occasions that things are that way. The point he's making, whether you think it's true or not, it's a perfectly simple one. He's saying it by means of one and the same recognitional capacity or ability, you recognize both the thing you see to be a zebra, you recognize it as a zebra, and at the same time, you come to know that it's by seeing it that you recognize it. You come to know that you see that it's a zebra. And that's something about you, not just about the zebra. That's what he's getting at by the self-consciousness being bound up with this particular kind of rational act. Now, in the good and bad cases envisaged earlier, you believe that there's a spider before you. McDowell's account provides an explanation of why there's an asymmetry between the cases with respect to the justification of the belief involved, or justification of a belief involved, and not just with respect to whether you know there's a spider before you. Remember that on the other view, the fact that you actually perceive the spider, while it may well be relevant to whether you know that the spider is there, is not directly relevant to your having justification. Of course, it's relevant in the sense that the perception can be the means by which you're furnished by an experience. But what has a justificatory role is the experience, not the fact that you perceive the spider. Now, as I said, on this view, the fact that you perceive can be relevant to your knowledge, but it's not, as it were, constitutive of the justification that you perceive. The perception is merely the contingent means by which you come by the justification. You might have had exactly the same justification in a hallucinatory counterpart case. Now, McDowell explains the asymmetry in this way. The asymmetry consists in the fact that in the good case, a recognitional ability is exercised, and in the bad case, it's not. In the good case, you see the spider, recognizing it to be a spider, and in that very act, you also come to know concerning that very spider that it is a spider, and also believe that you see that it is. In the bad case, you've not exercised your ability to recognize spiders as spiders by looking at them. How could you when you've not seen a spider? Of course, you don't know that there's a spider before you, and neither do you know that you see that there's a spider before you. So the justification to believe that there's a spider before you that's available in the good case is not available in the bad case. Hence the asymmetry with respect to justification, and not just with respect to knowledge. It matters hugely that the justification in the good case depends on seeing the spider. So in this, as in many other respects, there's a stark contrast with the kind of epistemology that I sketched in the previous section. An important methodological point emerges. In mainstream epistemologies, it's standardly assumed that justification is to be explicated independently of knowledge. The aim is to account for knowledge in terms of justified belief and other factors. And of course, this is motivated by concern that if you make justified belief dependent on knowledge, the account will be circular because we're supposed to be explicating knowledge in terms of justified belief. For McDowell, perceptual knowledge is inextricably linked to justified belief. But, and this is, I think, really important, there's no attempt on his part to provide an account of the knowledge in terms of an independently understood conception of justified belief. The explanatory work is done by the notion of a recognition ability that's self-consciously exercised. The ability is also crucial for understanding McDowell's thinking on how reason reaches out to facts. We can understand the metaphor of our embracing a fact through perception, and that of a fact being made perceptually manifest to us, which amounts to the same thing, in terms of the idea that recognition, the exercise of a recognition ability, is a rational act in which a fact is embraced, made manifest to us. On the epistemology sketched in the previous paragraph, reason's work is done and justification secured, so long as your belief is based on the right kind of experience, however caused, and the justification is undefeated. By contrast, on McDowell's picture, perceptual recognition of something as an F, in perceptual recognition of something as an F, reason reaches right out to a fact concerning a perceived thing, to the fact that it isn't an F, and to the fact that one sees concerning this thing that it is an F. Now, I made some comments on the epistemology associated with the non-relationalist view. I'm now going to make some comments. I'm going to raise some issues about McDowell's epistemology. I've been emphasizing the centrality of recognitional abilities to McDowell's thinking. about both perceptual knowledge and the justification of belief to which perception gives rise. It's part of the story about the role of recognitional abilities that their exercise is an act in which mind-dependent things are perceived and recognized to be some way. But does this view depend on a relationalist conception of experience? When I highlighted certain key doctrines in McDowell's thinking, these key doctrines that I highlighted didn't include his relationalist account of experience. What it did include was a claim about perception. The claim about perception was direct realism, which is the claim that we routinely, directly perceive things in our environment. Now, before all this disjunctivist stuff came along and puzzled people, and I have to say, from a long, long time, it puzzled me until it just came to seem almost perfectly obvious. Or at least obvious what they were getting at. Actually, I'm not a disjunctivist about experience. That's the thing. That's what I know people not. It certainly seemed to me to be more readily intelligible than I first thought. Before all these people came along and puzzled us, people, I think, if it was put to people, are you a direct realist? Do you think that in perception we're routinely, directly aware of things in our environment? They would have said yes, no question. If you said to them, are you a non-relationalist, in my terms, about experience, they would also have said yes. They were both direct realists, and they held that in perception, we have experiences that are not themselves episodes of awareness of mind-independent things. Think of Searle. I can show you chapter and verse in Searle. There are books by Peacock. There's my own book, 1991, Reasons and Experience, and there's lots of other stuff besides. And why did they think that? Searle's actually rather explicit about this in his book, Intention. He says, look, the experiences are not themselves objects of perception. In perception, you have sensory experiences, but you're not perceptually aware of those sensory experiences. And John Foster, in a book on the nature of perception that came out a few years ago, he distinguished between perceptual mediation and psychological mediation. And he noted that the non-relationalist can hold that while perception is psychologically mediated, that doesn't entail that it's perceptually mediated. And so it's not at odds, plausibly at any rate, it's not at odds with direct realism. So here's an issue then. Can you be broadly McDowellian in your epistemology while rejecting the relationalist conception of experience, that particular view of the metaphysics of experience? McDowell says no. I think the view that you can dissociate them is at least defensible. One further issue raised by McDowell's thinking, and it's about the nature of recognitional abilities. McDowell assumes, without argument, that it's in the nature of those abilities that their exercise is self-conscious, so that it's inextricable from your visually recognizing a spider as a spider, that you know also that you see that it's a spider. Now, plainly, it would, provided you have the requisite conceptual resources, on any occasion in which you see a spider, you're also going to, and any occasion where you therefore know that concerning some spider that you see that it is a spider, on any such occasion, you will also know that you see that it's a spider. That's just common sense. Of course, epistemology's got to, deal with such problems as one might think there is, but it's just part of common sense. And there's nothing in philosophy, it seems to me, is going to shift that. But why should we assume that someone with the conceptual resources to recognize a spider as a spider must have the conceptual resources to even entertain thoughts as to what they see. Of course, it would be odd for someone not to have enough bringing that would provide you with both sets of conceptual resources. But why should we think that the one set is inextricably bound up with the other? I don't think McDowell ever tells us why he thinks that's so. Now, I'm going to mercifully wrap up in just a moment. Just a moment. On the last section now. As I said, I used to defend the non-relationalist view within the framework of the kind of epistemology I discussed first, the kind that, in relation to which I quoted Connie and Feldman. I could have mentioned other people who think in a somewhat similar vein, like Jim Pryor. I now think that on the epistemological side, that view is incorrect. And I've been motivated by some of the critical remarks that I made when I was talking about the non-relationalist view. My present view of perceptual knowledge has significant affinities with that of McDowell. Indeed, I go so far as to say that in rejecting his rejection of the parity thesis is one of the key fundamental insights of epistemology in the second half of the 20th century. But that insight, it seems to me, is not dependent on the relationalist conception of experience. So what I'm interested in my own work is trying to show ways in which you can ally a recognition of abilities account of perceptual knowledge and justified belief with a non-relationalist account of the metaphysics of experience. So what I've been offering is merely a preamble to that work. I'm not able to go into details here. So I'll leave it there.